Uh, and welcome to my presentation, all distinguished participants of the conference. I am presenting on two themes that I will, as much as practically possible, in the interest of time and coherence, try to join. And one of them is education and the SDGs, that is Sustainable Development Goals, in the context of progress and challenges in fragile states. And the second one is peace, education, and social cohesion in school curricula. I'll begin by a brief discussion on education in context of it being an SDG, and also introduce the issue of peace and try to discuss them together. We are all aware about the Sustainable Development Goals, which constitute 17 goals and have targets in them, 169 targets. So education is a Sustainable Development Goal 4, whereas peace is part of SDG 16. Now, the theme is concerned with the states categorized as fragile, and then for purposes of conceptual clarification, when we say a fragile state, I use the concept of fragile state in the context of a state whose government institutions are weak and ineffective, which could result from various causes. Could be conflict, could be high incidences of violence, etc. So education, as I've pointed out, is part of SDGs, and it is actually SDG 4. And the SDG 4 has the objective of ensuring an inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. And this is essential because education is recognized as a fundamental human right in both international law and domestic laws of states, including my own state, Kenya. And it is also a driver of sustainable development and one of the very core drivers of sustainable development. And again, when we say a driver of sustainable development, because there's a concept, it is accepted that sustainable development goals are interrelated and interconnected. They cannot separate the realization of any from the others. So education also becomes now a very important aspect of realizing these other sustainable development goals. Just to give an overview, what are the challenges that fragile states may have in the context of realizing SDG 4, that is education, that is quality education. And we say this is, as it is described, is not just the basic of the lower levels, but also a life learning opportunity, and that is at the professional level. Because even professionals have continuing professional development programs. Although in the context of this conference, I think certainly more focus and concern is more basic and elementary levels, so that it is also now possible to also achieve those further advanced levels. So certainly, fragile states are affected by conflict and insecurity, and that will directly impact on education and the capacity to offer education, whether it is those who will provide the service or the learners themselves. And even those who should be learning at times is that children are at times recruited as child soldiers, or at times even used in activities that they should not be. I'll give an example of the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, where children are actually used even in mining activities. So the destruction of schools, attacks, and occupation of schools and learning institutions and homes by participants in armed conflicts, etc. There's also the displacements and humanitarian crisis, whereby starvation, because the capacity to learn requires you be in a secure place, and you should have access to food. And that's why we are saying other aspects of other sustainable development goals are also coming in. Weak institutions and weak governance also means that the mechanisms, how the schools are managed, accountability in schools, ensuring that the curriculum is well designed, etc., is not achieved in fragile states, which again, that is coupled by lack of resources and infrastructure. And when you say this lack of resources and infrastructure problems, that will also include teacher shortages and failure even to identify the appropriate teaching gaps or curriculums that are oriented towards quality learning. And the issues of inequality and marginalization and exclusion of certain categories, because it is in fragile states more that you'll find certain elements of the society being excluded. And examples could be, say, the female gender or girls. There could be ethnic or religious minorities being excluded. Those with disabilities, especially children with disabilities, etc. Psychological factors, a child who's probably because of the conflict, the children their parents probably have been killed, might not be psychologically, or whose parents are participating in the conflict might not be psychologically oriented towards quality learning. So, etc. So there are many factors that could challenge the capacity of realization of SDG 4 in fragile states. So there's also this aspect of peace, because in the context of my theme is that how can peace, education, and social cohesion be integrated in education curriculum? And peace itself is an independent goal, part of goal 16, because SDG 16 says promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, etc. And about it also goes to issue of building inclusive and accountable institutions at all levels. And so I have already pointed out that we cannot separate education and achievement of peace, sustainable peace. As I have pointed out, it is a separable fact that the SDGs are interconnected and interrelated. So how can peace and social cohesion education be integrated in school curricula in fragile states or countries? I've already pointed out, of course, there are those weaknesses, and I'll repeat them again briefly in the context of peace, integrating peace and social cohesion in curriculum. Of course, with this, we are looking at it in a model, the ideal situation. Well, the state is fragile, but what should what should be the objective of the state and non-state
actors in that state, because these state actors and non-state actors state actors, of course, would refer to the entities within that state, governmental entities within that state. Non-state actors could mean the NGOs, local NGOs, international NGOs seeking to institutionalize peace and development in that country and higher levels of education in that state. Of course, there could also be intergovernmental organizations such as the United Nations and the regional organizations. If it is an Africa, AU could be there, for instance. If it is in parts of, say, the Arab countries, the Arab League, etc. So it could also be in Europe. You might find the non-Atlantic Treaty Organization active there. So what could they be concerned about would be, of course, be curriculum content that with the peace education content or modules and lessons, civic and human rights education, historical content to describe the factors that what could have caused the conflict, so that history teaches us how to avoid similar problems in the future, etc. The teaching methodologies, again, that are practical and acceptable and interesting, which could be, for instance, participatory learning, including debates, storytelling, role plays, peer mediation programs, such as training children and students to mediate conflicts among themselves, prepare them for even mediating within society, which of course at times erupt into conflict, bigger community conflicts, and non-discriminatory practices, encouraging fairness, inclusion, and respect, and courtesy in classes. The training of teachers would also be important on some of the skills we have said, pointed out, and also teachers to be trained to recognize and reduce biases in the class, and be capable of providing psychological support to vulnerable or affected learners. I pointed out that it's a problematic situation in fragile states, which at times psychological aspects require to be looked at. Community integration, that is including involving parents, community leaders, etc. And of course, accepting to integrate local actors, whether they are non-governmental NGOs or intergovernmental actors. I've given an ideal, but already pointed out that there is general challenge in fragile states, even when it comes to education generally. And there are also, in more particular or more specific aspect of integrating peace and social cohesion education in school curricula. There are certainly certain challenges, such as governance and political barriers. And we say already a weak or fragile is only political problems. So outrightly, there will be more lack of political will, more politicization of curriculum, and weak education infrastructure. And there might certain aspects of the curriculum might probably not even be acceptable. Even those actors must know that certain aspects of education may be sensitive, because for instance, if you are to teach historical aspects to be able to prevent the future aspects, there could be contested historical narratives, there could be cultural resistance, there could be mistrust. In fact, education itself might be seen as a bad, not as a good public good, depending on societies. Some societies in fragile and conflict situations are against certain aspects or elements of education. And they might actually, community and cultural factors could be a barrier to proper and quality teaching. There could be teacher-related challenges, and I already mentioned that broadly, in terms of insufficiency or in training, um, lack of motivation, prejudices in teachers, lack of security, and when I talk about lack of security, now this is the context of the environment in which the peace and social cohesion is to be taught. So it's already in the curriculum, but how is it to be taught? So there could be the learning environment challenges in the context of insecurity, exclusion, and at times shortages in resources. There could be lack, there could be implementation challenges in the context of over-dependency, for instance, on aid, that if the aid is not continuing, then learning cannot continue. And again, this humanitarian aid or humanitarian assistance is tied to capacity for it to reach the local levels. So if it is too much dependent on aid and something happens, because it's already a fragile state, more conflict erupts, then education is affected. So I've just given, I'm not exhaustive and I cannot be exhaustive. I'm just giving an overview. I would probably maybe want to give. There has been, of course, some progress. Some progress in some cases. We can say from cases that have, some states have been in a fragile state and progressed. We can speak, for instance, of Rwanda. Rwanda was affected by the genocide, and Rwanda now is a country, it's a developing country that is progressing well in many social aspects, including peace building and education. Sierra Leone, there has also been some progress, say, in places such as South Sudan. I may not be able to go to the specifics of these countries, but generally, some of the things, maybe what has made some of these countries achieve some progress. So again, I cannot be exhaustive, but some of the factors that could have contributed would be the change or in political will, and with the time, education is seen as a driver of sustainable development, including sustainable peace. For instance, it is said that Rwanda's government made peace education practically a national priority. So the other aspects that can contribute or have contributed is broad partnerships and collaborations between the government and non-state actors such as NGOs and the local communities. There's no doubt that the professional training of teachers on, and in particular on matters relating to peace, the elements that they should focus on and how to integrate it in curriculum would be essential. In properly integrating some of the things we say in the curriculum, that also it is practically embedded in the students at the community level and to our local reality, lack of acceptability of culture, history, narratives, etc., to make peace education relevant and acceptable. And of course, being sensitive to that. Provision of infrastructure and resources, that is inevitable, but there are also substitutes. If the country is fragile and it does not have physical materials, you can try digital resources which can be shared. The source also could be from other regions or other states, but the teachers through training about pedagogy, training this pedagogy, applies it to local, and of course, so essential so that if they are identified, I reach my presentation. So, in the interest of time, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your reflections on education and SDG. We are looking for second speaker, Dr. Jotham. Dr. Jotham Okumi, are you there? Or is there any questions to Dr. Kabau from audience?
Yes, there's one.
Yes, please proceed.
Okay. My question is about lasting peace within a country. I've listened to Dr. Tom talking about I don't know, peace and education in Rwanda, but I would like to know how this country can have a lasting peace while this same country is involved in conflict with another one. I would like him to make a difference between how this country can contribute to the large peace building within the region. And then I'm going to give the example between Rwanda and the DRC. I would like to have some clarification about this question, because this conference is to help also how we can understand some issues within regions like fragile countries like the DRC or Rwanda. And then I would like to know how those countries can contribute to build a lasting peace. I don't talking only about Rwanda or the DRC, but I'm talking too about Kenya, Uganda, and all those countries in the Great Lakes. I would like Tom to give some examples or some explanation how this country can help to have a lasting peace among themselves. That's my question. Thank you.
Dr. Kabau, would you like to take the question? Yes, Dr. Kabau left. It might be due to the internet issue.
Yeah, hello.
Hello,
Yeah.
I think, can I continue?
Yes. Yes.
And I seem to have had
No, there was a question, Doctor, to you.
Yes. The question asked an extremely difficult question. No.
Yes.
I don't know why I seem to be having a connection problem, but I will not be able to relay. I just give an example because we cannot fail to acknowledge. But to be frank, it's difficult to say what can be done because the problems within the larger because. Kenya Times is to speak from an informed position. There are many factors. There are many. It is a multifaceted issue, and things could be linked to problems even before Rwanda genocide. And probably and the various actors and many factors, and even some countries not in Africa, which originally contributed to or resulted in the conflict, not only in Rwanda originally, but also in the Eastern DRC, and because of that, it continues being a cycle. But some of the things I've mentioned, this including genuine interest in peace, political will, collaborations, both from the very local level to international level, and in good faith. Probably aspects of political will and good faith are the ones. Whether it is states that want to exploit minerals in Eastern Congo, and more, in fact, the majority are not even African countries. They are not the neighbors. So, because again, that fuels conflict there. So genuine quest for peace and political will. Probably that's all I can say.
Is there any other question to Dr. Kabau? Seeing none, thank you so much, Dr. Kabau, for your contributions and reflections on the education and SDG. We shall take the next speaker. I'm looking forward to invite Dr. Jotham Okomi. Okay. Dr. David. So, shall we take with the Dr. Okabaso?
So that my presentation can be followed. And the subject of my discussion this morning here is rebuilding educational infrastructure in post-conflict zones. And I think we cannot overstate the importance of education, in as much as we cannot also deny the existence of conflict in the world that we live in today. Whether you look at Asia or whether you look at Europe or even Africa, the world is really overwhelmed by conflict. And given that education is one of the most powerful engines towards not only personal development, but also, nation building, you can agree with me that conflict has had quite a huge impact on nation building, on economic growth, and on peace and stability. Conflicts have a way of disrupting normal life, and education, I think, has become one of the most affected sphere of human dealing that has been affected, that has borne the brunt of brutality associated with conflict, armed conflict especially, and instability have been very significant barriers to education worldwide. And of course, my presentation is more biased towards Africa. It has also been a very significant barrier in Africa, depriving millions, especially children, girls, I mean, children with disability and even displaced populations from places where there can be learning. We have also seen situations where there is militarization of facilities, child recruitment. All of this play a very significant role in eroding school systems and learning. And ultimately, of course, this lead to a deepening of poverty, inequality, and so forth. So that the need to rebuild educational infrastructure in post-conflict society is cannot be gainsaid. It's such an important agenda that we should reflect on. And it is good that some governments and some government organizations are taking up this issue seriously. I know that the African Union has, considering the situations, especially, for example, in Ethiopia, Somalia, Central African Republic, Nigeria, Sudan, DRC, it considered the question of rebuilding these institutional infrastructures to be of serious relevance. And on the 14th of August this year, the AU Peace and Security Council convened the 1296 open session that actually focused on education in conflict situations. And this was the second time that the Peace and Security Council was convening a theme on this particular issue. Last year, again in August, during the 1229 meeting, there was a session to discuss this particular subject. And the Peace and Security Council resolved to institutionalize education in conflict situations as an annual thematic focus. Of course, I say that this is because of the gravity of conflict in many parts of Africa and the impact that they have had on institutions. Now, what is this infrastructure that may need to be rebuilt in post-conflict zones, and how may we mitigate the impact of conflict on education within the context of rebuilding the infrastructure? Of course, infrastructure is not just the buildings, the collection of buildings and the spaces that people use for educational purposes. Infrastructure includes, but is not limited to, classrooms, laboratories, sanitary facilities, but also extends, number one, for example, to safe grounds, to safe spaces, it extends to furniture, it extends to the human resource. That is the infrastructure that will need to be rebuilt in a post-conflict scenario. But then, how do we do this when the conflict is ongoing? The African Union reflected on this matter and passed, there was a declaration, I think, on safe education. And the main approach perhaps would be to first see how to stabilize the context so that some form of, normalcy may resume. But this, the African Union suggests, maybe through supporting initiatives by peacekeeping, bodies, and supporting initiatives towards, absence of, towards reducing conflict, so to speak. But as I see it, and this is my contribution to this discussion, is that perhaps in the context of rebuilding institutions, we are at a place where we may need to get into some adaptations. And this adaptation calls for a migration into digital infrastructure. Digital infrastructure, so that as we think about the possibility of students, pupils getting back to learning, we think of a way through which we can offer education to individuals who have been affected by conflict, but who may not be in a position to congregate at a place for the purpose of that engagement, so that we look as the world into the possibility of remote learning, not just in the context of higher education, but also in the context of even basic education. So basically, those are my thoughts that I am trying to coalesce into a full-blown article.
Right. So is there any questions to Dr. Okaboso?
Yes,
Yes.
there's one.
Yes, please.
And I would like to know, as was saying Dr. Duncan, what means infrastructure without people, without professor, without student, without, I don't know, whatever. What does it mean? Can we talk about infrastructure without people who can use those infrastructure? In such a situation like fragile states, I'm going to give the example of the DRC, which is my country. There are some zones, there are some areas where you can't go with great buildings, with great laboratories, with great, I don't know, whatever. But there is no possibility to be there. There is no possibility to access. There is no possibility to have a professor. There is no possibility to have a pupil or a student in order to reach class, in order to have what we are saying. So I would like to know what's the difference, or how can we make a relationship between the infrastructure that was saying Mr. Duncan and people who are involved in this education within fragile states. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think when I was making my presentation, I emphasized that infrastructure includes, but is not limited to, the physical infrastructure. It also includes the human infrastructure. It also includes the teachers who are supposed to teach. It includes other enablers of learning. So that I do agree with you that we need to conceive infrastructure more broadly and widely, to not just to limit ourselves to physical infrastructure. And I think that is also the point that I did emphasize at some point.
Just also, I'm trying to get my presentation. I don't know whether you received it.
You're not able to?
I had sent a presentation. I'm not sure whether you had seen it, but I'd be happy to share on my screen.
Yes, you're able to share now. Now you may try.
Just give me a moment. Let me see if I can pull it up. And I have two presentations. So I'll be starting with the first one.
Yes, please.
When you want things to start, sometimes they don't cooperate, and this one is not cooperating right now. Yes, so just give me a moment. Although I can just speak of the CAF as well, because my first presentation is to have hands. Here, apologies. Dialogue and yeah, so I'm speaking on higher education's role in policy dialogue and governance. I am a governance practitioner in Kenya, and I'm also a PhD candidate, and my area of study also happens to be policy, actually law policy and governance. So I want to welcome you to my presentation, and of course, the context that we've been considering. And I would just ask whether you can see my presentation on the screen, because I can see it on my end.
No, it cannot be seen.
Okay, let me stop that and try it again. Okay. Can you see?
No, we're not able to see.
Because I have it up on my screen and it's saying that it is sharing. Let me give it one last opportunity, but if not, I'll just proceed without benefits. Still not yet, huh?
No.
Okay, so allow me to just share from I guess off the cuff, but I do have a presentation and I did share a PDF copy with the organizers, and thank you so much for this opportunity to be a part of this very important discussion. And when I was thinking about the presentation, the first thing that occurred to me, so how do we define a fragile state, and how does it interact or interface with poverty and conflict as well? So I took fragility to mean any kind of political instability where you find weak institutions. And then, of course, what tends to happen is that you find social inequities, and there are also environmental shocks that come to disorganize what little possible infrastructure there may be. So what tends to happen is that with the fragile states, there the poverty conflict nexus creates a cycle of deprivation and sometimes violence. And what this then tends to happen is that education becomes disrupted, including at higher education levels. So, and why does higher education matter in this particular context? It matters in all contexts, but I do believe that universities are stabilizers and knowledge hubs, and therefore, when we're incubating the talent that is emerging, when we're incubating knowledge and research, when we're incubating innovation, sometimes even disruption, then university education becomes very critical in supporting both government as well as the private sector. So the public sector, the private sector are all fed by the products of higher education, first with the human capital, And then, of course, with the knowledge base and the knowledge management and the continuous research and development, which enables and facilitates the production of new information, new knowledge, and it could be scientific based. Now, of course, social science is also becoming a big area for development, particularly because of how the world has registered quite a significant amount of uncertainty. We thought we were all moving in a certain direction, but at the beginning of the year, we realized that first nationalism, sovereignty has begun to rear its head, and the questions that we want to ask ourselves on the environment, they're very broad questions, climate change related, pollution based, biodiversity, they're all connected, and the societies, each and every one of us is feeling the brunt of what the trends and emerging realities are. So higher education then becomes a very critical platform for policy dialogue, and for universities particularly, like University of Mysore, the University of Nairobi, Mount Kenya University, all the universities that are represented here, then other than just incubating knowledge, because that has been the traditional role, it then becomes important to create a nexus between the education sector and policy. Policy tends to really reside a lot with the political sphere, and therefore the universities have to become a little bit more aggressive as knowledge brokers, so that whenever there's any question on policy, we need to be able to say something about it, to say, look, we have done research on this area, whether it is law, whether it's social science, whether it is actually the natural or physical sciences, and say, well, the question has risen now. We have somebody who has been looking into it. They've been doing research. They have collected data. And what they have found is, and then we present the policy recommendations. So the knowledges need to be knowledge brokers in addition to being knowledge incubators and creators. And then that therefore means that we need to look a little bit more away from just looking at our research, or also when it comes to teaching the incoming generations, and create a huge, a bigger, and create spaces for dialogue. And the spaces that, and this is where, okay, I practice governance. And for many, many years, we've really kept to one specific area of governance, corporate governance for companies in the private sector. When we have branched out and gone all out into the public sector, we have worked with government-owned entities, but we've been very shy about speaking about political governance. And that becomes critical at a time such as this, when governments are looking to, flex their sovereignty muscle, flex what they're capable of doing, flex the knowledge capacity, the knowledge capital that they have. And then also we should be able to broker the dialogue between government, civil society, private sector, and the communities. Because many times when the political governance dialogue takes over, the dynamic changes everything. And it's important for there to be evidence-based research to be able to speak into the question of policy. So at this point, I'd want to probably recommend to ourselves, being the academy, that at any single time, and I'm speaking to Africa, I'm speaking to the global south, we should have policy think tanks in place, and critically to prevent conflict, because we're finding so many areas emerging of conflict. We need peace studies centers so that we can deal with those nations that are in conflict, and critically also for the purpose of rebuilding for post-conflict nations. And there is no shortage of countries which have had to deal with conflict. So when you try to marry this with the question of a fragile state, it removes the discussion from development specifically, and also we have the lesser developed countries, we have what is called the more developed countries. It brings the question of what really is a fragile state. I'll give the example of Kenya when in 2024, we call them the Gen Z protests, as a response to the finance bill. We found that at that point in time, with the many civil unrest that were emerging, we would feel that we are fragile. Our peace has been, our peace is not guaranteed anymore. And we then had to question who is available to speak to the question of the public finance, who is available to speak on the social issues that had begun to emerge. The divergence or the gap, the wealth gap between those who have and those who don't have. Therefore, when we look at it from the governance perspective, then governance also has something to contribute to higher education. And just a quick rundown, because I think I only have 30 minutes. Good governance principles, we have them enshrined in our constitution, and their integrity, there's transparency, there's accountability and participation. There are many other principles as well that tend to come into this discussion. And when we speak to good governance, we're talking about how do we engage with consensus building. That helps to prevent conflict. How do we get the citizenry to participate? That also helps to reduce conflict. How do we get various institutions, both in public and private? Mostly we tend to focus on the public sector, but accountability and transparency tend to also affect the private sector as well. Where do we get responsive institutions? Are they telling us the truth first? Are they telling us what they know? Are they sharing the benefit of their knowledge? Are they sharing what they are required to be doing? Are they meeting the basic tenets of good governance? And then we look at ensuring that they're efficient, they're effective, that they're equitable and inclusive. The discussion, the debate on equitability and inclusiveness has grown to such an extent that there are so many different schools of thought. There are so many different dynamics that go into this. How are they feeding first into the institutions, and then also how is it percolating within the higher education space? Is everybody following the rule of law so that we can see that they have traits of good governance? And then, because I tend to look at it from a symbiotic relationship. Governance in public sector and the private sector, governance also for higher education. This is an area for incubating knowledge, so creating the material for capacity building for public and private institutions, training first the future civil servants, the future policymakers, the future community leaders, and then also learning from them what is happening in their particular communities, in their particular spaces, and how all this knowledge can be brought forth for purposes of dialogue within the context of think tanks and exchanging knowledge and building new spaces and building new frameworks and infrastructures as well. And critically, because governance is an important subset of the rule of law, do we have legal clinics? Are we having conflict resolution programs? Are we doing civic education? Who is doing it? Is it practitioners? Is it knowledge-based experts? Is it the students themselves who are also engaging in the exchange of knowledge? So the strategies have to be all inclusive, looking at developing the community, looking at research to policy pipelines, translating academic research into actionable reforms. We tend to be accused, sometimes justifiably, of engaging in research and then letting it accumulate dust somewhere in the researcher's office or somewhere within the confines of a reputable university or higher education institution. So we need to bring out all this academic research that has been done, put it into actionable reform, and then also consider how to leverage technology and innovation. I put this knowing that I also have another session that I'll be talking about digital learning, and also how technology supports youth entrepreneurship, because unemployment remains one of the biggest problems of youth, not only in Africa, not only in Kenya, but pretty much around the world. And then after we have invested in the, say, one student, every student who makes it through higher education to just the bachelor's degree has spent at least 17 to 20 years in formal education. So they have been invested in through the knowledge available within their universities, all the way from the initial education, all through to high school education and higher education within the university. And what tends to happen is that when they do qualify, the next thing that we see is what we're calling brain drain, because there's the feeling or the expectation or the actual position that there's limited funding within this space. And brain drain then means that those we have educated then look for opportunities of either higher learning or employment in other different countries. And this could be simply as a result of looking for opportunities. It could also be as a reaction to political interference. It could also be through the repression of academic freedom, and also where there are conflict zones and there are security risks that are prevalent. So the recommended way forward that I would want to just come in is to, first of all, strengthen the university autonomy and academic freedom on an institutional basis, and also then integrate higher education within national peace, either institutions or framework, and also poverty reduction strategies, and also collaborate like we are doing with the global universities, donors, and multilateral agencies. So I'll probably just end with a call to action to empower universities as neutral policy catalysts through funding research, protecting academic freedom, and embedding education in every stage of governance in the country, out of the country, that is cross-border, with a view to driving evidence-based decisions and lasting peace. I hope I've kept within the time that I had been allocated. I will be happy to take any questions or comments.
Is there any question, Tomo? We encourage the audience, the participants, to put question across. I think there is no question. Thank you, Mom. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I have a question. Can I?
Please proceed.
I tried to open the video, but it is not getting open. Could you please help me?
Good afternoon. For those following us from this side of the world, good morning. For the rest, I have been assigned two sub-themes, the first one being transformative education and economic empowerment, and access, equity, and inclusion in education. I will handle them together within the time prescribed. If that is fine, I proceed.
Yes, please proceed.
It's an honor to stand or else to address you and to contribute to this critical dialogue on the role of education institutions in addressing poverty and mitigating conflict. I want to start by setting the tone with a narrative here, just an example for you to get the context. I want you to imagine for a moment a young girl in a refugee camp. Let's call her Amara. She has fled conflict, lost her home, and faces an uncertain future. To many, she's a statistic, a recipient of aid. But Amara has a dream. She wants to be an engineer to rebuild the very infrastructure that was destroyed in her village, the single most powerful catalyst that can turn her potential from a statistic of tragedy into a story of transformation is not food, not shelter, as vital as they are, but a classroom, a pencil, a teacher who believes in her. Amara's story is at the heart of our discussion today. It illustrates the central thesis I wish to present, that is, transformative education and genuine economic empowerment are not separate goals. They are fused together, and the binding agent, the unbreakable link, is access, equity, and inclusion. The theme of this conference rightly identifies educational institutions as catalysts, but as a catalyst, the definition of a catalyst being, by definition, requires the right conditions to work. In the context of fragile states, which has been mentioned a number of times by the various presenters, environments grappling with weak governance, persistent conflict, and systemic exclusion, our catalyst often fails before it even has a chance. Why do they fail before they even have a chance? Because we often pursue economic empowerment as a standalone objective, parachuting in vocational training or entrepreneurial programs without first building the foundation upon which they must stand. The problem is clear. When we fail to tackle the systematic barriers that keep marginalized groups marginalized, we are not just failing this group of individuals. They can be the girl child, persons with disabilities, the most vulnerable women in society. We are actively sabotaging the economic future of the entire state. We are choosing to build an economy with only half our tools and with only half of our talent. So, the so what is this? So what, the question? Exclusion is not a social side issue. It is the primary obstacle to economic resilience. Exclusion. It is the friction that grinds the gears of progress to a halt. An education that is not inclusive cannot be transformative. They must be handled together. And an economy that is not inclusive cannot be stable. So we'll proceed to explore how we can move from acknowledging this problem to actively solving it, using tools that may be less conventional in educational circles, but are, as I will argue, absolutely essential. That is the following: the frameworks of law, governance, and dispute resolution. So what is transformative education? First, let us be clear and describe what transformative in education means. It is a significant step beyond basic literacy. It is an education that equips a young person not just to read, but to question. Read, understand, and question. Not just to memorize, but to innovate. Subsequent to reading, understanding, and questioning, you need to innovate, use that information to your advantage. It must deliver three core things. Identify the three as follows. Critical thinking, number one, that is the ability to analyze, solve problems, and adapt in a rapidly changing world. Number two is market relevant skills. This is where the TVETs, technical and vocational education and training, come in. They become non-negotiable. Education must directly be linked to sustainable livelihoods. Number three is peace and civic values. In fragile states, the classroom must be a space for building social cohesion, tolerance, and an understanding of civic responsibility. But here is a crucial point. None of these transformative outcomes are achievable at scale if the classroom itself is a site of exclusion. I keep on repeating this: exclusion, exclusion, exclusion. So this brings me to my core argument. For too long, we have approached educational access as a matter of policy, of aid, of charity. Educational access, policy, aid, charity. It is time that we repositioned it for what it truly is: an enforceable, fundamental human right. Okay? This is not a radical idea. It is enshrined in the UDHR, that is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the CRC, that is the Convention of the Rights of the Child. But in fragile states, where the rule of law is often the first casualty, rights on paper mean very little. So how do we make these rights a reality? We must build robust legal and governance frameworks around it. As a lawyer, as an arbitrator, and as a consequence, a dispute resolution specialist, I see every day how contracts and laws can shape behavior and guarantee outcomes. Why should education be any different? I ask myself. We need to start thinking like architects of a system. We need to build this system. We need to design it, not just as deliverers of services. We must create the structures that hold governments, donors, and private partners accountable to delivering inclusive education. Again, I mentioned inclusive. And when these systems face challenges, as they will inevitably do, as most systems, that is, they are not beyond reproach, we need mechanisms to resolve them efficiently and fairly. This is where my world of dispute resolution comes in. It offers a powerful and largely untapped set of tools. Consider these practical scenarios. I identify again 3 practical scenarios. 1, a community disputes the location of a new school, stalling construction for years. Mediation can bring stakeholders together to find common ground, ensuring the school is built where it serves the most vulnerable. Number 2, a government signs a public-private partnership with an investor to build and run a vocational training center. The investor fails to deliver the promised resources for students with disabilities. A lengthy court battle is impractical. Arbitration, which is designed to offer a faster and more flexible process, can enforce the contractual obligations for inclusion and offer the project and ensure the project gets back on track. And number 3 is an international development bank funds an education project, but the funds are mismanaged and schools in minority regions are never built. An independent accountability mechanism operating on principles of fairness and justice can investigate and provide recourse. These are just but examples of how dispute resolution can offer solutions. They're not just abstract ideas, they are practical solutions to real-world gridlocks that prevent progress. And the examples I've identified are very prevalent in fragile states, as we call them. So furthermore, we must connect this to global conversations on sustainable investments. The language the world of finance understands these days is ESG, that is environmental, social, and governance. Investing in inclusive education is one of the most powerful social and governance actions a company or even an investor can take in a fragile state. It is a direct investment in human capital, a proven strategy for de-risking the environment by driving stability, and a clear indicator of good governance. When we frame education this way, we move it from CSR budget to the core strategy of economic development, right at the center, epicenter of economic development. We can then demand that investment contracts contain specific, measurable, and enforceable ESG clauses related to educational access and equity. And we can use, again, arbitration to hold them to it. So the way forward here, where do we go from here? How do we build this architecture of accountability as I described it? Here I propose 4 actionable strategies. The first one being we must champion innovative legal and financial models. Move beyond traditional aid. We need to develop sophisticated PPPs, that is the public-private partnership frameworks for education. These contracts must have inclusion hardwired into them from the start, with clear KPIs, key performance indicators for enrolling, for example, girls, refugees, and children with disabilities, just to mention but a few. And critically, they must include clauses that designate international arbitration as a mechanism for resolving disputes, ensuring a neutral and effective forum for enforcement. The second is we must leverage technology as an equalizer, but with equity. Very important, but with equity. Digital learning holds immense promise for reaching the unreachable, but a laptop without electricity or internet is just a piece of plastic. Policies must focus on building the foundational infrastructure for digital equity. That includes public investment in connectivity in remote areas and subsidizing data costs for low-income families. The right to education in the 21st century must include the right to digital access. The third is we must fully integrate the TVETs, technical vocational training centers, into mainstream education. These vocational trainings should not be a plan B, as we have in some countries on this side of the continent, of the world. Sorry. They should not be plan Bs for students who do not pursue universities. In my opinion, they must be respected, high-quality track that begins early and co-designed with local industries and leads directly to apprenticeship and employment. This is the most direct path from the classroom to economic empowerment. Most often than not, in fragile states, you will find that the TVET is offered as an option to an alternative to the university training. I propose to have it mainstreamed into our education systems, such that when you leave your core educational training, you leave with core training in various aspects of vocational training. And finally, I also include the following: that we must demand and build radical accountability. This requires strengthening governance from the grassroots to the national level. We need independent bodies, education that include identify the two educational ombudsmen and commissions with the power to audit spending, investigate complaints of exclusion, and recommend binding solutions. This is not about blame, it's about building systems that are transparent, responsive, and worthy of public trust. I'm about to conclude. So in conclusion, the path to mitigating conflict and elevating poverty in fragile states runs deeply through the schoolhouse door. But that door must be open to everyone. We have the tools, we have the knowledge, we have the training. What we need now is the will to build new frameworks, to think not just as educators or as providers of services, but as architects, as I explained earlier on. Not just as donors, but as investors in human capital. Not just as policymakers, but as guardians of an enforceable right. The story of Omara, the young girl I mentioned in the camp, as I started my presentation, does not have to be one of unrealized potential. With the risk of structures in place, she will not only, with the right of structures in place, she will not only rebuild her village, but she will help build a new, more prosperous and more peaceful nation. The investment we make in her and in millions like her is the most critical investment we can ever make in our shared future. I think that brings to a close my presentation. Thank you very much for your time and attention.